Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. In my daily show, I interview today's latest best-selling, buzziest, or underrated authors and story creators whose work I think is worth your time. As a bookstore owner, publisher, author, and obviously podcaster, I get a comprehensive look at everything that's coming out and spend my time curating the best books so you don't have to. Stay in the know, get insider insights, and connect with guests like I do every single day. For more information, go to zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. Jayne Mattingly is the author of This is Body Grief, Making Peace with the Loss That Comes with Living in a Body. Jayne is a disability advocate and eating disorder recovery coach. She is the CEO of Recovery Love and Care, a global virtual eating disorder recovery coaching curriculum and training program. She is also the founder of the nonprofit, The And Initiative, which aims to provide inspiration, advocacy, resources, support, and the gifting mobility aids to those with chronic illness and physical disabilities. Jayne lives in South Carolina with her husband and pets. Welcome, Jayne. Thank you so much for coming on Totally Booked with Zibby to talk about This is Body Grief, Making Peace with the Loss That Comes with Living in a Body.
Thank you so much for having me.
My gosh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much also for sharing your story in this book, naming something that heretofore was not named and giving sort of this way of talking about things to the many people out there who have gone through any sort of physical setback, disability, on. And, all of us are just one step away from this potentially being our lives and having all of this. And of course, as we age, everybody, is giving up their bodily stuff. So anyway, a long introduction to say how absolutely relevant and helpful for everybody on this planet this book is.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is. Body grief is something that I really do believe is universal. I think that it's something that, especially now in this climate too, when we talk about just like loss of bodily autonomy wherever we are, it's something that I think we can all relate to.
100%. Okay. Yeah. So do you mind, I know you wrote this in the book, but tell a little bit about the story of your own body situation.
Yes. To make a really long story short, I was once a identified as a non-disabled, woman and quote unquote healthy person, whatever that might be, and I had a lot of internalized ableism. Ableism, for those that don't know, is just when we really kind of project our, beliefs of what is, we might think of as able-bodied. The world is made for people who are able-bodied, whether it's architecturally, societally. And I had a lot of that in me where I just didn't know what being disabled really even was. I thought being disabled meant you were just paralyzed. I really never was exposed to what being disabled was. So I had an eating disorder when I was 9 years old. It went undiagnosed. That's very common. And I went through recovery when I was 22. And so I made it my passion, my problem into my purpose, and went and got my clinical mental health counseling. Sorry, my service dog is alerting me right now. Beatty, just settle. So I went and got my master's in clinical mental health counseling when I was 22 years old. And I was like, I'm going to make my problem into my purpose. And I worked with eating disorders. And I started kind of screaming from the top of my lungs at events saying, work out for what your body can do. Work out for what your body can do. Love for your body for what it can do. Little did I know how ableist that was. Because then I found myself disabled. I found myself in a bar class. And I lost my sight. And that led me down a series of brain surgeries and spine surgeries. 6 years later, I have had 19 brain and spine surgeries and a total hysterectomy. I was diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder called intracranial hypertension. And I realized as I was getting all of these surgeries and I was in the hospital and I was like, shoot, now that my body can't do, how am I supposed to love it? How am I supposed to do all of this? And here I was telling all these people these things. And that was a very ableist thing. And I realized this is body grief. I'm grieving the life that I used to live. I'm grieving the body that I used to have. And as I spoke these words to people of all ages, to my clients, they were like, wait, I have that too. I identify with this, whether it was through menopause, whether it was through injury, whether it was through aging, whether it was through, infertility, pregnancy loss. And so I started to study it and I started to hear people's stories. And then came this book.
Wow. And you also, not to make you catalog your medical stuff, but you also
No,
have...
I would be happy to do whatever.
And you have a genetic condition that
do.
Yes, which
EDI.
also interplayed with that. And now tell everybody what your mobility is like.
So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is what I was diagnosed with. That really kind of is like the primary diagnosis. EDS is a genetic illness and it's known as a rare diagnosis, but really they're kind of saying now, geneticists are saying it's the most common diagnosis that no one has ever heard about, which I think is a really important thing to put out there because it's a genetic diagnosis that we're born with. But then again, I don't think people are really, you don't know you have it until later on in life. There's 14 types. I have hypermobile type, and it's a spectrum disorder. So you can be asymptomatic, and then you can also look like me, who's had all these surgeries, and I'm in a wheelchair now. I rely on my service dog. I can no longer drive. I live in a one-level household. And, I was climbing mountains and skiing in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I was a dancer and taking spin classes, very active. And now I am disabled and in a wheelchair, and I live a very wonderful life, but it looks so different. I mean, me and my husband are now in an interabled relationship, and there's so much grief. And in this book, This is Body Grief, it talks about, how we can live through our body grief. And if we heal it and we work on healing it, there's joy and there's gratitude. And if we feel our feelings, we can feel that. But if we don't, then we use our maladaptive coping skills. And, it might look like an eating disorder. It might look like addiction. It might look like, a lot of different things. And that's what it looked like for me when I wasn't really kind of feeling the feelings and naming my grief. Yeah, but for me, it's been a rocky ride. It's been a really bumpy ride. And I want people to know too that it doesn't have to be like this hierarchy of suffering. I think sometimes people look at my story and they're like, oh, well, that's not me. So I don't have body grief. I haven't had an incomplete spinal cord injury. I don't have 19 surgeries. So that's not me. When really, the common cold could even be body grief, where it's like you have this cold and you're like, you wanted to go to your favorite concert. That could be body grief too. That can bring up grief because you're like, why is my body betraying me? Why do I feel like this is happening to me? And it's like, this is what happens when our bodies don't act like we thought and we were promised they were entitled to do so.
Can I read a little section of the book?
Please.
Because I feel like this speaks to how relationships have to change, how so much is impacted, and this deep-seated sort of devastation that... Anyway, let me read and whatever. You can comment. You said, as I learned to live with my condition, I continued to find myself always apologizing for something. My lack of mobility, the extra space my mobility aids took up, how damn slow I had gotten, my inability to participate in inaccessible places, my chair, my mobility service dog, even the time it took for me to get from the car to a restaurant. There was no more running to the store or hopping in the shower for me. I needed others to help me do the simplest things, but it just felt like too much to ask others to adjust on my behalf, and I was oh so very apologetic about being such a burden. The first time I was able to overcome this was a game changer for me. I had moved from Chicago to Charleston at age 25 and hadn't been home in a while. There were lots of reasons for this, but the changes to my body, due to the brain and spine surgeries I had undergone, coupled with the restrictions of the pandemic, made it much harder to travel. This was heartbreaking, and my mom coming to visit me regularly felt like the only option we had. It was on one of these trips that she asked if I would be home that summer. I froze. We were sitting in the sun on my back porch. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I knew that I had to be honest. I want more than anything to come home and visit Mom, I told her, my eyes starting to well up with tears. I tilted my head back so they wouldn't fall down my cheeks. But the house is not accessible. I can't walk up and down the stairs. It's just too dangerous, and I know it worries you all too. I expected her to be hurt or even get defensive. I didn't want to inconvenience my family or be a burden on them. But instead, she replied immediately, well, maybe we should get a stair lift. My eyes lit up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Really? He would do that? Oh.
Oh my gosh. First of all, it's surreal to hear you read this to me because the book, is still not out yet. So, and to hear like Zibby Owens read that is wild.
Oh.
But that is the thing about body grief is that it's continual. It's multi-cyclical and it never is grieved, right? Like that is one thing I kind of drive home in the book. And so I even kind of tear up hearing that because as we have our new grievances and as we, name our new grievances, we kind of always continue to go through it. It's just we, with hindsight, continue to compound what we learn. And just a couple of days ago, I was there. I was at Apology. And so you read that and I'm like, oh my God, I was doing that again, But I learn from it and I build on my body trust. And then I kind of catch myself in it. And I'm like, you know what? Here I am again. Here I am again. Here I am again. And I do my breathing and I take my skills and I learn from it. And I get through my phases a little bit quicker. And that's what this whole framework is about. But oh my gosh, it sucks.
Yeah.
It just sucks. And what the reality is I think like we need to talk about how it kind of sucks living in a body sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
If
only there were another alternative.
Right?
Yes.
Like it just, I think the pandemic taught us that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I would assume being a mother has, taught so many people that, but it's also beautiful. I think mental illness teaches us that, where it's just like, I want out. There's, a couple days ago, I was in the ER and I was like, I have in the book here, one of the skills is to throw a tantrum, to just throw a tantrum. Because when did we stop doing that? When society told us we couldn't. And, it's a regulated tantrum, not in a public space, when you were doing with a kid, and I did. I threw one in the car and my husband was like, just do it, But I was so angry because I was like, why? Why is this happening again and again and again? And it allows me to get out of these places where I'm just constantly apologizing or because that's not a healthy way for your brain to just go there to apologize for taking up space that you will always be taking up.
Well, it also did not happen that long ago. This wasn't something that you had as a child and now you're fully grown. Like this was in the last, 8 years, 6 years?
Yes. 6.5 years.
6.5 years. So when you think about grief over losing someone for any other types of grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not gone within 6.5 years. Like you're still processing. And the anger is something that comes with all of it, right? Because when things aren't fair, it's how can you not get angry? It's not fair.
Exactly. It's not fair.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, it's not fair. And then I think there's this like cognitive dissonance in this because also being a part of the disability community is a beautiful thing too.
Of course, I'm sure. Yes.
And so then there's this piece where it's like, oh my gosh, this community is so beautiful. And the more I use my mobility aids, I'm able to actually be more independent. And this is amazing and beautiful. And I miss my old life.
Yeah.
And so that's tough. That's tough. And there's truth to all of it. I think that's when it's like it's both and.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I lean into community, and community truly is the antidote to body grief. It really is. Because as I lean into community, I feel like I'm embraced and I feel like I can learn and I can become just like a student of it all, right? And I can, learn from people that have been disabled their whole life, right? Or even like with my hysterectomy journey, and I went through surgical menopause, and I can learn from people that, are older than me that have been through menopause, right? And just be like, okay, I can lean into this too. But then there's also grief being like, why am I going through menopause in my 30s? And then there's the anger again, right?
So what made you take all of this and write a book about it?
Well, I think I realized as I sigh.
A big sigh.
A big sigh. I'm so proud of it. And a huge reason was when I was working with the eating disorder community, so much of recovery of body image and eating disorders is body grief. So much of that is body grief. And that's, a niche community, but also so many people struggle with disordered eating and body image. I don't know one person in this world that doesn't struggle with their bodies or dieting. And that population in itself is struggling with grief of being like, I miss how my body used to be. I miss the life I was once promised. And I was like, this needs to be written about. And then I also started to talk to people in the chronic illness community with autoimmune and and disability. And one of the main themes and one of the biggest reasons I wrote this book was I wanted a book that people could take into therapy. And I hope this reaches people because when people talk about despair and hopelessness, I've talked to so many people saying they're scared to talk to their therapists because they're scared to use language like, I'm feeling hopeless. I'm feeling fearful that I don't want to wake up in the morning. But that is an everyday experience for someone who is experiencing body grief. It doesn't mean that they're actively wanting to end their life. It just means that they want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was writing a book like this so that professionals and clients could sit down and have a real conversation about it without fearful that they would need to be committed or go to a higher level of care. And because I worked in that field. And then as I started writing the book, I was like, wait, this is so much bigger than just like the clinical world. This is everybody. And so, in the book, there's gender dysphoria and there's racial inequity. And it really became like a book about systems of oppression and, so much. There's puberty and, I have a story in there about my dad. There's injury. And so it became a lot bigger than I realized it would be.
Interesting. And was it therapeutic for you? I know you did it as a sort of a mitzvah for others, but was it?
Yeah, it was. It really was. Because it was my first book. And to have Penguin, take this was a huge deal.
Yep.
But it was really magical. Like the whole experience was so magical. I would keep saying that. And, my husband would come home and be like, all right, what version of Jade am I getting today? Because she's probably grieving a whole nother part of the story. But I learned to be able to kind of set boundaries with that, leave it on the porch. I'd write it on my porch in Charleston and then kind of separate that because I was reliving everything that I was going through. But yeah, I think one other thing too is that grief and gratitude go together. They are symbiotic, just like hope and hopelessness. Mm-hmm. They can't exist without the other.
Yep. I love that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is a totally irrelevant question, but for anyone listening, Jayne has like the best hair I've ever seen. Tell me about your hair. What products are we using? What hair dryer? I'm looking at these like cascading waves, like a la Farrah Fawcett or something, and I'm very jealous.
Well, okay. I was given amazing hair. And I always make the joke, like thank God I was given genetically something good because the rest wasn't so great. And my parents are always like rolling their eyes at that joke because they're like, this isn't funny. But yeah, my mom has like the best hair. Her dad passed with like a full head of beautiful hair. So genetically, we were blessed with hair. But I think it's really just genetics. I hate to say that. Satin pillowcases are the way to go. And I like douse my hair in conditioner. Like this much conditioner, like up 2 handfuls.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
Back to, I had to talk about the superficial. I mean, we are talking about our bodies, the good and the bad.
The lore behind my hair goes so far back. My mother is like, I think it actually, some people are like, I remember once my therapist was like, I would like to go into this a little bit more. And I was like, please don't. Please, like, can I just keep this as like a nice, sweet memory? Because my mom used to curl our hair every morning, like even when we were like 3 years old. And she's like, I would like to delve in deeper. And I was like, let's not. It's like, I have an eating disorder. I have chronic illness. Like, I would like to keep this.
Oh my gosh.
But thank you for that.
Sure. One part of the book you were talking about, with your body and that you could be grieving, that that your illness can make you gain weight or lose weight and you feel out of
Yes.
control. And there are all these spiraling things. And what do you do? And all of your references, of course, to eating disorders and all of that.
Mhm.
Where do you fall on the fact, like having body acceptance for
Wow.
weight in the middle of body functionality and all the rest? It's not like you can
Ugh.
take it away.
Right. So there's this, body positivity and body acceptance and body neutrality and all the things. There's all these
Yeah.
movements, right? Body positivity was a movement in the 1980s, actually, that was made by Black and BIPOC women, fat women who are also disabled. And it was actually kind of like co-opted by white women in like the 2000s. And so, which tends to happen, right? Like white women do that. So we kind of took it over and we were like body positive. And I actually didn't know about that until like a couple years into my Instagram journey. And then I was like, oh, we did this. We kind of took this over. So being positive about your body, I think is wonderful. Being neutral about your body, I think is great, but I think is actually kind of unattainable for some people, right? I think being accepting of your body is also great, but it's a little unattainable, right? Because look, if some of us can't like use our bodies, if some of us are grieving our bodies and can't, are constantly losing our abilities, if we're always sick or if we're just constantly in the grieving cycle of something, it's very hard to be like, just be neutral about it, just love your body. So I think it's okay to say, like, I'm working on healing. I'm working on, I'm in grief, but I'm working on healing. And I dip my toe into body trust whenever I can. And I think that's the most realistic way we can go about it. I don't think it's, I applaud anyone that is anywhere else. But for me, having been through over a decade of recovery, I can positively say that I am in recovery. I am recovered. And, I also have all of these other ailments. And, there's some days where I literally can't walk and it's incredibly hard to eat and my body rejects food. And so I got to trust my body. I have to nourish my body. I have to water my body. And it's also hard AF. So it's just a constant process. When I, was talking about this book with Penguin, I was like, the thing with self-help that's so hard is, in the publishing world, they want like kind of a fix it at the end. I was like, this isn't going to be that, this isn't going to be a Band-Aid grieved situation. And that's what I loved about them is that they were like, that's okay. It's more just realistic.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a constant process. It's nonlinear and cyclical.
Wow. Well, how great to have you as this stunning ambassador for
Oh my gosh.
this, because, you get people to pay attention, right?
Oh, thank you.
It's true. I mean, your words are stunning. The whole thing. It's, no, it's great. And it's great that you have developed this whole platform on Instagram and that you have your community behind you and that you're sharing like the ups and the downs and that there are good days and bad days. And
Yes.
it's not all just behind this curtain and,
No.
it's okay. And like, it should be known and watched and understood because it's so important.
Yeah. It's just kind of every day is different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just sucks.
And sometimes it just sucks.
Yeah.
But even then, like we can have our good moments. I romanticize every little bit of my life. So, like yesterday, I made, we were having some, issues after a colonoscopy. And then we went to the ER because the doctor said we had to. And of course, like the hottest doctor came in to the ER. And he walked out of the room and my husband was like, "Oh my God." And I was like, I know. I don't know if you watch Modern Family, but he was like, "This is like Cam and Mitch with the hot firefighters." And I was like, "Are you Cam or are you Mitch?" So like it was the worst day. We waited 7 hours in the ER after a colonoscopy and then we were laughing. Like you just have to make it work.
Oh my gosh. Jayne, thank you so much. Thank you for This is Body Grief. Thank you for
so
coming
much
on today. And yeah, it's been just such a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you loved the show, tell a friend, leave a review, follow me on Instagram @ZibbyOwens, and spread the word. Thanks so much. Oh, and buy the books.